Welcome to Leadership Where It Matters Most. The family is the most important institution in the world. The future of the church passes through the family. The church has the greatest mission of any organization ever. Go and make disciples of all nations. The family and the church. This is where leadership matters most. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Leadership Where It Matters Most. Today's episode is another special one. I think they're all special. I hope you feel something similar to that. We've got Father John Riccardo as our guest today. Father John, I've been a fan for many years, ever since he was pastor at Our Lady of Good Counsel and just doing some amazing things for parish renewal there. But I've been, I would say, a friend for a few years, and just recently was able to meet him actually for the first time face-to-face, even after spending many hours on Zoom together and planning different things. Father John and his ACTS XXIX team are actually currently in Vancouver when we recorded this. When it's published, he'll be long gone, but the context is that he was actually here for a Rescue Live event. He was here to do some equipping of Proclaim kind of parish ministry teams, as well as facilitate the priest retreat for the priest of the Archdiocese. Father John is currently the executive director for ACTS XXIX, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important ministries in the church today, even though they're small, because of the what they're doing, the ministry that they're doing, which includes definitely evangelization, the proclamation of the Kerygma, as well as ministry to priests. They bring leadership teams from parishes and dioceses to their offices for some leadership, some bonding, some vision, to encounter God, to plan, to pray, to really understand what the Lord wants to do in and through them and their leadership team. So that's another important piece of their work. Father John's been a pastor for 15 years. He was a priest for 28 years, still is a priest, and a few years ago asked his archbishop to be released to launch this ACTS XXIX ministry, and the archbishop gave him permission and blessing, and off they went. So they've got a small team, about 10 people. They're all missionaries. They consider themselves missionaries in the work. Today's conversation is really just an extension of my relationship with Father John. We kind of go all over the place. At times it's, vulnerable and open and like two friends talking. It's a real honor and a treat to be with him in this way. We talk a little bit about ACTS XXIX, what the ministry is, why it was launched, who is a part of it, kind of what they do. We talk about vision and the importance of not falling into discouragement and despair, especially in the midst of such interesting times, let's just say, with the metrics that the church is very well aware of in terms of the low numbers of people practicing their faith. Even some of the most fundamental truths that the church teaches are not being embraced, not understood, all that. So we talk about vision, the importance of vision, and how that really inflames hope. We talk about Rescue Live event. We talk about their ministry to priests. We talk a lot about different things. So it's a great conversation. I really hope that you enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in. Yeah, enjoy Father John Riccardo. Father John Riccardo, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Joy to be with you. I'm actually in your studio. This is great.
Yes, well, it's a makeshift studio. We, funny thing, listeners, we actually recorded a podcast together a few weeks ago, and there was a technical glitch, so nothing at a certain point got recorded. So here we are. Father John's gracious to be with us again. And you're here in town, and it's just a delight to be with you. Been a huge fan, long time friends, I would say, for a few years, and now getting to know you face to face.
Yeah, great. It's been a gift. I wish Vancouver was a little bit more attractive. Wow, what a spectacular environment this is. God didn't want me to live in a place like this, or I would probably be doing something different. So, but it's great to visit. It's great to be with you, and just so grateful for the way the Spirit's been moving the past week and all that He's got still ahead.
Yes, there is a lot. And you're up at Whistler too. Shout out to our Whistler friends.
Yeah, and that wasn't bad. It was, there was no clouds for 3 days. It was just gorgeous.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about the bears, and you had a surprise today, right?
We did. We got a bear on the first green of the little house that we were staying at. So we got within a couple hundred yards. He seemed to be dawdling at the green, wasn't interested in moving, or at the first tee, I should say. Yeah. Wasn't interested in making it down towards where we were, but he was probably 300-400 pounds. So that's cool. And we got a grizzly alert the day we left, that the grizzly woke up. Ooh. It was crazy. We got like a alert. Hey, Bobby the grizzly's awake, and he's hungry because he just woke up. Whoa. So we didn't see him.
So that comes on your phone?
It came to somebody's phone or email. It was crazy.
My goodness.
Yeah.
That is crazy. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
So he's a known entity to them.
I guess so. I don't think his name is Bobby, but anyway.
We'll
Bobby
work
Gus.
with it. There you go. So Father John, I want to actually just talk a little bit about Acts and kind of how and why and when it started, because I'm quite amazed running into people that are really committed to parish renewal and all good things, evangelization, all that, and yet they still maybe haven't heard, don't know, or don't deeply understand. So why don't you just tell us the story? What is Acts 29? Why Acts 29? And who's Acts 29?
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised that people don't know a lot just because we don't maybe recently we've started to do a fair amount with media and whatnot, but before we were kind of limited with what we were trying to do. And so we weren't trying to get the word out all that much. It's a little different now because of the ministry, the way it's evolved. So if you don't know the Bible well, you wouldn't know that there's not a 29th chapter in the Acts of the Apostles. And we didn't come up with this. It comes from a number of different people. I've seen lots of folks refer to the fact that the time we're living in is the 29th chapter of Acts, if you will, meaning that the same Holy Spirit who was writing in the early days of the church is still writing right now, and God's got a starring role for each and every one of us. So Joan of Arc's one of our patronesses, and she says famously, "I was born for this," and we think that's true for every human being, that we were born for these days that we're living in. So it's the name of our apostolate, but it's the name of the church right now. This is the 29th chapter. So we're a small team. We're about 10 people. We're just all missionaries, all lay people except for me. Most of us have known each other for anywhere between like 35 and 15 years or so, from parish ministry, from college, from whatever. It started really because my archbishop was gracious enough to release me from being a pastor. So I was a pastor in a couple different parishes, and then we move. Like here, we typically move every 12 years as pastor, and my term was coming up, and I had a chance to sit down with him talking about some other things, and I just asked him, would you be open to me doing something different? Because I don't think God wants me to be a pastor anymore. And he said yes, which is pretty remarkable in a time of shortage of priests and whatever. So much like God pulls guys out of pastoral ministry and puts them in seminaries, and they can multiply in seminaries and form new priests, like I think God pulled us out of parish ministry and diocesan ministry to work with dioceses and with pastors and with bishops and lay leaders around the country and the world.
That's awesome. Hanging out with you now for a few days reaffirms some of the things that I see as really essential to what you do, and really the animating why for what you do. And one of the things that you talk a lot about, and it comes from papal documents, but is this idea of being overwhelmed by the gospel. John Paul II said, sometimes even Catholics have never had the opportunity to encounter Christ personally, not as a mere paradigm, but as the living Lord. What do you mean by overwhelmed by the gospel, and why is that important?
We have a number of what we call essential principles that are necessary for transformation in the church. And the first is what you said, the way we would say it is reacquiring a biblical worldview, the climax of which is the gospel. I love that quote you just made from John Paul, and the one that I've always heard too and often repeat is, it's from Catechesi Tradendae, a document on catechetics, where he says, the initial ardent proclamation of the kerygma, the core content of the gospel, is supposed to be such that a person is overwhelmed and then moved to entrust their entire life to Jesus in faith. I don't think that's happened for anybody. And so I would use, especially being here in Vancouver, looking at the beauty is overwhelming. So beauty makes you just stop. I mean, that's why they have turnouts on the road up to Whistler, because they presume you're probably going to want to pull over and pull out your phone because that's gorgeous. Yeah. And you should capture that. Like, you should stop and look at it. So when I hear overwhelmed, especially being out here, that's probably how I would think of it, just stunned by something. And what John Paul's saying is that we should be stunned by the beauty of God's love made manifest in the person of Jesus and all that he's done for us, and defeating death and sin and Satan, and doing it in the way that he did it on the cross, and proving to us his love for us. That should jar us, but of course it doesn't. I don't think most people have ever been overwhelmed by the gospel.
Yeah. It's evidently happening in your ministry. I talked with one young person at Rescue Live on Saturday, and the words that they can come up with to summarize their experience, they said, I would open my mouth and share with you, but I'd be afraid I would just start bawling. That was the encounter. There's a lot of work, I'm sure, still yet to happen, but that's really what it is being overwhelmed by the truth of it. So anyways, thank you for sharing that. Another thing that you often talk about, and again, I've seen it in writing and different things that you had, and now I've experienced it. And this is speaking really to maybe parishes or even Dawson teams, but this idea of going away from being just a staff or a staff team to a staff family. Like I have seen it with my own eyes, just the way that you guys interact. There's a level of trust and healthy intimacy, brother and sisterhood, accounting on each other, knowing each other's stories, knowing each other's wounds, caring for them and loving them. Like it's all evident. But tell us what you mean. Why is that important to move to a family idea?
Yeah. So that's our second principle for transformation.
We didn't set this up. This is just coming out naturally.
So we actually call it, the way we title is it's not enough to be a staff. And what we fully mean by that is in the church, whether it's a parish or a diocesan office, we need to move from being a staff to a team. There's a lot of work on team building that's been going on. I know you're enamored with organizational health. I enjoy it greatly too. But teams aren't biblical. There's only one time in the scriptures where teams show up. It's a chariot. That cannot be the model. We have to learn how to be a family. And that's dangerous language for people, either because like I had a horrible family and I don't want that here. Or the other extreme, my family was so good. How dare you say that this working environment is going to be a family? But for us, I'll speak as a priest, just to say, like, I was trained in seminary to keep you at a distance as a layman. I'll respect you and I'll use you for the things that I need, but be very careful and never be vulnerable with the lay faithful. And be very careful that you don't become too close with them. In fact, I know bishops who've said to their priests, you should never be friends with the people you work with, and you shouldn't be friends with the parishioners. We can't more violently disagree with anything than that. I don't think it's biblical. We often say to pastors, Paul uses lots of words to describe the people that he serves and does ministry with. Staff isn't one of them. I don't think it should ever be used in the church. I think it's an offensive term, actually, if I can say it that strongly. I think it belongs in corporate world and it's very appropriate there. I don't think it's true as brothers and sisters working for the gospel. Clearly, there's a hierarchical structure. That's not, my point isn't to do away with that. We all have roles, obviously. As we're recording this, we just heard the reading of Paul leaving Corinth with Priscilla and Aquila, who I think are Paul's best friends, a married man and woman who shared the same trade. They show up everywhere Paul is, in at least 3 places, 3 different communities. And I think that's a model for us of how to do ministry. And even, the objection then becomes, well, but what about when you've got to move on from somebody? Because that happens, right? You're working with somebody and either they want to move or it's not a good fit. And I think, again, biblically, there's reasons why, Barnabas, Paul, and Mark, who are all saints, stopped doing ministry together, which is really helpful for me. It's like, I love you. I'll die for you. I'll lay down my life for you, but we can't serve anymore together.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's there for us, amongst other things, just to show there's got to be a biblical Christian way for men and women who love each other, who are part of the body of Christ, to recognize, hey, for whatever reason, we can't do ministry anymore together, but I love you. You're my family. I'm not going to discard you or kick you to the curb or speak badly about you. We have to be, just like we can't imitate the world in how we break up when we date. Yeah. We can't imitate the world when we break up from doing ministry together.
Yeah. It's funny, Father John, because obviously you have an appreciation of staff teams, organizational health, structure, strategy, all those things that we sometimes pull from the corporate world. And you're not far removed because your dad, very successful, in the audio industry, ran Chrysler or was the chairman of the board, right? So it's in your language and you have an appreciation for it, but it's not the be all and the end all. But one of the things you dropped was a bishop actually saying to his priest about, not trusting laity or not building those strong, intimate relationships. I want to just pause there because that seems to fall in that category of this notion of holding clergy in this preternatural state, somehow between heaven and earth. which the only way that I can describe what I think of that is that it's so unkind. Because that's not how you are. So maybe if I can invite you to get even more personal, like you as a pastor for 15 years and as a priest 28 years, like what is the benefit to you personally to be in right relationship with lay people and being vulnerable and open and developing friendships and risking vulnerability? Like how has that actually impacted your priesthood?
Oh gosh, I probably would have left the priesthood years ago if that wasn't in place. I mean, my best friends, I have some really good priest friends, and increasingly so over the last few years, I think probably since ACTS, because of just the relationships that have developed with guys kind of around the country and around the world. But most of my best friends are lay men and women. So I find the tragic irony, this is just my own experience, it's probably not every other priest, but it's mine. And I see a lot of priests kind of nod their head when I say this too. For whatever reason, lots of us in collars struggle with being real with each other. You'd think the guys that have like foregone marriage and family for Jesus would be really comfortable talking about Jesus, but for whatever reason, we're not.
Yeah.
And so I can be more quickly myself with men and women who aren't ordained. I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
I think family life probably makes people more real. I mean, it's hard, Andrew would tell you, hey, Brett, stop acting like a jerk right now.
Yes,
nobody says that to me.
Did you hear her say that today?
Nobody says that to a priest.
Right.
They say it about us.
Yeah.
But they don't say it to us, So it's really easy to live in unreality land if you're not close to laymen and women especially who really care for you and just go, hey, you don't look good. What's up? What can I do? Can we pray for you right now? You want to go have a beer? Like whatever. My priesthood is anchored in prayer and the sacraments, and then in really deep, abiding friendships with laymen and women.
That's beautiful. I see it. I knew it and I see it. And I just honor you guys for it because it requires hard work. Whenever I've had the opportunity to speak to different presbyterates, whether it's large gatherings or even smaller gatherings, I do compare kind of life of a priest from what I see, because I'm not a priest, obviously, with married life. And you're right, like living to a holy woman. I think Morgan Snyder is the one who said this, is like living with a live oak tree in your living room. Like you can't get around it. They don't tolerate the stuff and all the rest of it. And in the moment, and vice versa, this isn't just a nagging wife. It's a holy woman wanting the best for you and from you at the same time, which is a beautiful gift. Like I said, vice versa. But you're right. Priests don't necessarily have that naturally in the relationships. And not to linger there too long, but I will often share with them, and it kind of blows my mind, Father John, that there isn't that level of fraternity among priests in a particular diocese, even that fraternity among priests in a particular parish, because you live such a similar life, the vocation that you live. And we're all facing the same difficulties out there. The difficulty in the ministry is, consistent throughout the West. And we see it in things like the military or police services where they're coming into very difficult circumstances. And the difficulty itself is this environment where a band of brothers can be formed. And it's beautiful. It's awesome. It's revelation of the fact that we're social beings. We're created to need each other. And yet we don't see it. And I'm not saying that as a complaint or pointing the finger, but it breaks my heart because I gotta think there is an abundance that the Lord promises, abundant life, that you're not realizing because you're not in those relationships.
So you just used an analogy that I'll expand on if I can. It's not the only reason by any means, but I think it's a big part of the reason why the priesthood is the way it is sometimes. Because much like the military, we're trained all together. But no commander-in-chief would ever send a soldier out alone. Ever. It would be stupid. Absolutely stupid. He's going to get picked off. He has no support. No one to watch his back. Nobody would ever do that. That's a surefire recipe for disaster. You're never going to win a war going out alone. A good friend of mine's a fighter pilot. No plane goes up on its own.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
And yet, for whatever reason, and you might have been able to do this decades and centuries ago when the culture was very different.
Yeah.
You might have been able to send guys out on their own. You can't anymore. I just think part of the transformation of the eras that we're living in right now is a recognition of the fact that this is not a healthy way for a priest to live, and it's not an effective way to win people to the gospel. Because I think the reason why we have the impact that we have in Acts with other priests is, much like you just said, they watch us as a family, and we're really intentional. Like, we're not trying to play. Yeah. We were doing work in a diocese one time. We were working all day long with the diocesan chancery, and then we went out to dinner that night, and we didn't realize that the people we were working with were at the restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And a guy came up to us at the end of the night, and he says, we've been watching you all night long. And you guys, you were with us 10 hours this morning and this afternoon, and were pouring yourself out. And now you're with each other again, laughing, talking. And he just looked at us with this really holy jealousy. And he says, I don't know how to do that. Can you teach us how to do that? Because we want that.
Yeah. Wow.
And so we're trying to model that. It's an unspoken part of our quote unquote curriculum. Like, guys need this. And hopefully I bring something to, the other missionaries on our team, but man, do they bring an awful lot to me. I'm
sure. That analogy you gave about soldiers being trained together, and you've never, I don't know if I'm ever going to forget that. That was so insightful and revealing, especially for our time. And thank you for that witness. And I get it. I mean, there's that thing, belong, believe, behave. You heard that. And we know that belonging should be first, but it's like when people look at the average community, the average interaction between pastor and the people, it's like, why would I want to belong to that? It seems kind of distant or cold. And yet when it's done right, when there's actual doing life together in a holy, healthy way where joy lives and holding each other together and support, I mean, it's just such an attractive thing. And I think the domestic church, that's the primary witness, I think, of the family, is to create this evangelical hospitality that people just want to be a part of.
Yep.
I just want to be in this environment.
And so if they don't see that, again, if we're told, no, don't be friends with the people you work with, well, then no one's going to see anything in us, and no one's going to get drawn to it. Yeah. And then on top of that, all these people, the parish where some of us in Acts used to serve before we started this, we had 12,000 people. It was a great parish. Out of 12,000 people, maybe 20 really knew me as father.
Yeah.
So all these people call me by a word that I'm not.
Right.
Your children know you.
Yeah.
And you know them. And father, even though it's the term that people use to call a priest, it's the last relationship. It's the farthest away relationship that almost everybody in a parish context has for the man who's, serving as pastor. They don't know him as father. They don't even know him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know them.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating for us.
Yeah.
It's why, in the challenges that the church is facing about how we're going to handle all the new situations that we're in, sometimes people think, well, you were ordained to celebrate the sacraments. And there's a lot of truth to that. I get that. But I don't want to be a circuit rider, just like living in my vestments, going from mass to mass to mass. You preach very differently to people that you know. It would be like you trying to give a family gathering to somebody else's family.
Right.
Well, I don't know what to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Like what are the struggles here? And so that's why this is fun times to live in. People could look at it as frustrating. I look at it as exciting because God's not nervous right now, and he's got a plan for us.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. That's the next thing I want to talk about. This has been, for me personally, one of the big, I hope, not yet determined, but one of the big fruits is, how do I say this, Father John? My hope has been challenged as of late. And I want to be able to operate with vision all the time. And I want to talk to you about vision and the necessity of hope. And there's that statement that you just made about God's not nervous, because I know implicitly the vision has to have like a picture of the preferred future. We have to think about that which animates our hope, and we can see it. Martin Luther King, I have a dream, and he saw it, that kind of thing. But we have to be grounded in reality, current reality, confront the brutal facts of reality. And I have spent a long time in those facts. And even recently, there was a study done by Cardis, which is like a kind of like Canadian Pew or Barna or something like that. And the stats are coming out, and I wrote them down. First of all, my diocese, 85% of people that are baptized Catholic don't go to church on Sunday. Only
85%.
85% don't go to church on Sunday. There was a study that came out of St. Joseph's Seminary in Edmonton by this institute called Benedict XVI Institute, Dr. Ryan Topping. And if I'm quoting it correctly, I understand that the trajectory that he's done and studies on longitudinal priesthood and seminarians, in the year 2030, the entire Church of Canada will present 13 men for ordination. In all of Canada, 13 men. So the Cardis research came out, 50% of Catholics don't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. Only 30% believe in the real presence. And there was another one, 50% don't believe in the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I hear these stats.
But I'm Catholic.
But I'm Catholic, right? And you hear these stats and you look at the culture and everything else. And it is really, like when you're conscientious about things and you want it so bad, it's hard not to have your hope like really challenged. And I don't want to be that guy because, especially as a leader, leaders are dealers in hope. You have to have hope animating everything as you're doing. But sometimes it's going to be hard. And you have dropped a line that has hit my heart, not gently, I'd say heavy many times, which is this idea that God is not nervous. And I love you saying it that way because I'll just speak passionately here. What I don't want is I don't want somebody looking at the brutal facts, confronting reality for what it is, and then just saying, oh, but the gates of hell will not prevail, because it seems so presumptuous. Whereas saying it that God is not nervous reminds me that he's a person, he's engaged, he's around, he's a loving father. He sees the pain I'm in, and maybe other people can identify with me on that. But unpack that. Like when you say that, God is not nervous, what's the essence of what you're saying? Because I need that message deep in my heart. And I think a lot of listeners do as well.
So it's something that the Lord's been just reinforcing on me too, because the metrics are so bad. And as a pastor for all those years, it was so, I mean, you get preoccupied by the people who are complaining or the people who aren't there, the same kinds of things that you're talking about through the statistics. And at the same time, I pray often with two things. One is Psalm 46, be still and know that I'm God. And you can translate the Hebrew in lots of different ways, but you can kind of just, in a certain sense, it's like God saying, hey, just breathe.
Right.
Breathe. Relax. Like, hold my beer. I have this. But connected with that is, and this comes from the overwhelm part, Beth, that we were talking about earlier with the gospel. To say Jesus is Lord is not an empty title, and it's not the mere ending of a prayer. It's a reality. So to say Jesus is Lord means nobody else is. He is. At the time that we're recording this, we're anticipating the celebration of the Ascension. And I think lots of people, I think myself, probably even scandalously recently, we miss the fact that when we say in the creed that he ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father, that's the crescendo of the creed. Which means what? It means he's in charge right now. That's what it means. It means a man, forever a man. Like Jesus is wed. I'm talking about somebody who loves human nature. It's not like God became a man for a little while to put things right. And he's like, okay, now take care of it, guys. I'm going back to being just me, a divine person and a divine nature. No. He's still got his human nature, and he will for all eternity. That's how much God loves us. This man is at the Father's right hand, which is a biblical way of saying he's the CEO. That's who he is. He's in charge already, just not yet fully, which is really important, this tension that we're living in. Like Jesus has already defeated death. He just hasn't destroyed it yet. He will one day. He's already defeated the power of sin. He just hasn't destroyed it yet, but he will one day. And he's already defeated Satan. He just hasn't destroyed him yet, but he will one day. And because of that, like, I think the way the Lord's been teaching me what he was doing in his passion, or just, exposing me to how the early church used to preach about the passion, it rounds out what I think is often this, for some people anyway, an almost effeminate image of Jesus, where he's only gentle.
Yeah.
And he's only kind. And he is those things. He is gentle. He is kind. He is compassionate. But Jesus is unconquerable. I mean, who do you know who can say, I was dead once, but not anymore. And death has no power over me. Yeah. And that's the one who said in his wisdom. I want Brett Powell to be alive at this time. And I want John Riccardo to be alive at this time, not at another time, at this time. And so because he has no rival, he's not anxious. And so I shouldn't be anxious because he holds my life in his hands. And he has a plan for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. And he has a plan for your parish. He has a plan for your marriage. He has a plan for our lives. And the beauty is we don't have to figure it out.
Yeah.
We just have to ask him, what's the plan, Lord?
Yeah.
And especially living now, that's probably going to come incrementally. In the past, it could have been a 10-year plan. You talk about vision, hey, we got a 10-year vision. Good luck with that. COVID ripped all those things to shreds.
Yeah.
Now it's probably more like, his plan's a lamp for my feet. I see the next step. So you have plans, but they're probably, it's almost like COVID made every single institution a startup again.
Yeah.
And some people don't like that. I love it. Like, I love the drama of the time we're living in right now. And I love the statistics you read, because here's the reason why this is so hopeful to me. The world has nothing to offer the culture. That's why people are struggling with mental health in the way that they are. The gospel does.
Yeah.
Like, not because we're smart, but because God is who he is. I have a remedy for your loneliness. I know a guy. I have a remedy for your despair. I have a remedy for your depression. I have a remedy for your sense of alienation or anxiety or fear. Like, you don't have to live that way. And nothing in this culture can offer you what God can offer you. That's why this is so exciting. That's why people get angry when they finally hear the gospel, who used to go to church, and they're like, I never heard that.
Yeah.
How come I never heard that?
Yeah,
Why didn't anybody ever tell me that? You and I get to live at a time much like St. Paul's time, where we're surrounded by people who genuinely don't know who Jesus is. And what an amazing honor it is to be the first person to tell them about him.
Yeah. What a privilege. It's amazing. It reminded me, actually, when I was working with CCO, I had the opportunity of meeting with a student coming from Asia who had never heard of the resurrection. Never heard of the resurrection. Now, a lot of people who have thought they've heard of the resurrection, but maybe in the way it was communicated or whatever, they have not really had that encounter, which is what, rescue is all about. Sorry, I want to stay on the vision thing, because there's another thing that you've been dropping a lot over the last few days, which is this idea that, we have one enemy. Because in the midst of all these discouraging stats and all that, I could throw up my fist and say, seminarian formation is, so deficient. And why don't our bishops just lead? And what if the pastor would be praying? And, you can just make these enemies in your mind. But we have one enemy. Now, why is that important to operate and really understand?
Yeah, so that's the biblical worldview, is that the only single enemy of the human race is Satan and his minions. And so we got to clarify that to help people, or unpack it a little bit more. But the way I would say it intentionally provocatively is, I don't think as a disciple of Jesus, I'm allowed to have a human being as an enemy.
Oh,
I might be theirs.
Yeah.
They're not mine. They're just rebels. Rebels to win. And that was and still can be me, quite candidly. That's not to say that people don't do wicked, horrific, evil things. Of course they do. So it's not to say that evil doesn't exist, or that people aren't responsible for the decisions that they make. But behind the wickedness is the one that Jesus calls the ruler of this world. And that's why he came. At least that's one of the significant reasons why he came, was to undo his works. And so to see with biblical eyes is to be able to look at what's going on in the world and be able to candidly acknowledge that's wicked, that's evil, the actions were, but that person isn't. That's my brother or my sister, even if it's only in the human race, even if they're not a member of the body of Christ, for whom Jesus died. Because Paul says Christ died for the ungodly. Oh, well, that would be me. That would be all of us, right? This wasn't a reward for the people who've lived well. Christ died for the ungodly, and he wants all of his Father's children back. The Father wants all his children back. If we don't think that way, then what we're going to do is we're going to demonize each other.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening right now. And that's why, whether it's here in Canada or whether it's back in the United States, politics is very important. How we govern and how we lead, and the legislative decisions that we make are very significant. They matter, but they're not the solution.
Yeah.
And they're not the solution because they can't fix the heart. And the key to problem solving is to find the problem, and the problem with the human race is the human heart. And if you forget that the enemy is the enemy, then you start labeling people.
Yeah.
And the goal is to eliminate them because they're the enemy. And that's a really that's where we are right now. Certainly it's where we are in the United States. And you might be there too. I don't know. That's a terrible way to live.
Yeah, it is.
It's an inhuman way to live.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody is aware of the polarization. We see it in the States in the politics. It's very much the same up in Canada for sure. We just don't have maybe the same terminology. But I think what's really dangerous about it, even at a heart level, is that it's not just that there's camps or polarization, but it's the vilifying that you spoke about, like the making of the enemy. And man, that lies underneath the thin veneer of all of our hearts. It's so easy to do as a way of maybe making yourself feel better or whatever. I don't know. And
we do it in the church.
Absolutely.
Right?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, the people who receive communion in the hand, the people who insist on the tongue, the charismatics, the TLM, like, we do this. Yeah. I mean, that's why no one's lining. That's why 85% of those who are baptized don't go to church, because they don't see anything different in us. Whereas they're supposed to walk into our church and go, son of a gun, these people, they have nothing in common except God. And because of it, they really love each other and they lay down their lives for each other. They don't tolerate each other. They love each other, and I can see it.
Yeah.
And when people see it, because that's what they saw in the early church, they'll be lining up to come to Mass and to get baptized. I want that because the world can't offer it.
No. Amen. What a gift. Father John, let's talk a little bit about your ministry to priests, because you're going to be with our priests, some of our priests, for the priest retreat. When you started Acts 29, was it always kind of a big part of it, or is that something that's kind of evolved over the last little bit?
Yes and yes. So we knew that somehow at the core of the work we were going to do was going to be just loving our brothers. I knew it from my own experience because when I left the parish, I took a month off and I went almost immediately into PTSD, or what felt like PTSD. And we had a great parish where God was doing amazing things. And I think if I'd stayed, I probably would have died. So the last thing we're doing is actually trying to replicate what we did in the parish, because that didn't work. I mean, we saw a lot of fruit, but that's not the remedy. God's enabled us to think about some things and shown us some things. So we knew priests, despite all the surveys that you see about how happy priests are, and I think that's true. I think priests are really happy. But at the same time, I think they'll tell you the most frequent thing we hear is, this isn't sustainable, it's not human, and I don't think Jesus lived this way. So we thought we were going to limit ourselves to working with, I get a load of this. When we first started, we thought we'd work with like 6 parishes around the United States. And I came back from that month off where I was waking up into PTSD, and we had 5 dioceses that had reached out asking if we would come and work with their presbyterates. And so I remember just writing on our whiteboard one day, I know we prayerfully thought we were going to go to 6 parishes. God's brought 6 dioceses to us. I think we need to go ask him again. Are you moving us in that direction? And so we started to do that. And now after 5 years, I think we've been with about 30 dioceses and about 3,000 priests around the country, and now into Canada.
Yeah.
And soon into some other places too. But it's given us a very privileged glimpse into the lives of our brothers.
I'll bet. It's funny because you talk about the loneliness or the happiness. And I was talking to, I haven't asked him permission for this, but I think he was actually a classmate of yours. He's a priest in the Diocese of the United States. And he said, what most priests might be classifying as happiness is a lack of kind of the usual inconveniences that people have. It should be maybe financial struggles or
right.
maybe raising
house.
Kids, right? I've got a house, I've got, food and all that. That's kind of the superficial level that he puts at it. And he talked about that. But I mean, you want to be there and all you want is what Jesus wants for the priests. So what is that? Is it an encounter with the gospel? Because maybe some of the guys even ordained. I mean, I had a priest friend that said he became a Christian 5 years after he was ordained. Is it an encounter with the gospel? Is it a level of prayer? Is it a fellowship and a fraternity of each other? Is it all of the above? What is the cry of priests?
There's a number of them. Mm. So I would say, just so I don't give the wrong idea, because I think the front lines is marriage and family. But I think everybody knows that. What I don't think people know is what's going on in the lives of priests, because from the outside, you would go, it looks like a pretty good gig. Right. Like you get a house, you don't make any money, but you get a house. I don't need anything. You work an hour a week, or so you think.
Yeah.
And then you start doing the life of priesthood and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, I'm a garbage collector is how I tell guys who are thinking of priesthood. I sit in people's pain all day long. That's the life of a priest. There's some joys too, but it's usually people who are in massive hurt, which is, so you talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, people who work in mental health, you better have an outlet, a healthy outlet, or you're going to find a bad one if all you're doing is sitting in people's pain all day long, because that's what we're doing most of the time. And especially if you're alone, and we're alone, there's no spouse, and there's usually not another guy in the house we're living. So you come home after all that you do, and you can, you grab a bottle, log on, you can call somebody you shouldn't call. I mean, you can go sideways in lots of ways. I think for some guys, the first thing that often goes in people's lives is prayer. I mean, I've heard tons of guys just talk real candidly about what a struggle it is to pray an hour a day. Yeah. And I'm convinced if you don't pray an hour a day as a priest, you don't have a chance. I'm sure that's what saved me, together with friendship. And then the structures. So it's personal intimacy with God on one hand.
Yeah.
And then the structures on the other might have been helpful decades ago. I think they're untenable now. And the priest can't change the structures. That's the challenging part of it. So what we can do is, let's surround ourselves with a family.
Yeah.
That's why the family on mission piece is so good. That's something that is within my control. Yeah. I can gather people around me and say, hey, I want to do life with you, and will you help me in prayerfully discerning what God's asking us to do here as a parish?
Yeah. When you say structures, what do you mean? Just so that we understand, is that like just the expectations of people in the pastor and the difficulty of life, all the demands or responsibilities you're not trained for? Is it those things?
So some of it is the day-to-day demands, and then some of it is the fact that I think parish structures are broken. Mm-hmm. I think there's got to be another way to do this. I don't know what that way is. And it changes from place to place. That's why the way the Lord's led us to pray about solutions is to be at one and the same time very practical, but without being prescriptive. I mean, this is a massive archdiocese. You got people who are in urban settings, and you got people out in the middle of nowhere, and so do most dioceses. So the solution isn't cookie cutter, but there has to be another way to do ministry than the one we're doing, because it's not, one, the results aren't working. You just read the metrics.
Yeah.
Two, the guys who are doing it are often not thriving. And three, the guys who are attracted to our life because they see the joy in us, they see what we start, so they're drawn to me because they see joy, I hope, but then they see what I do and they go, oh, I don't want to do that. I mean, that's really common. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do that. I'll go join a religious community or a missionary order. I'll go get married and do mission work because I don't want to run McDonald's.
Yeah.
And it looks like you're running a McDonald's.
Wow.
And I don't want to do that. That's what I do now.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of leaving that for the gospel, that doesn't look any different. You've just said God's name a few times in the course of running the McDonald's.
Oh, wow. You bring up some, this will probably be the last topic that we go after, and I know this is very central to you and to your team and how you operate. And you spoke a little bit about this when we were up in Whistler together. And it's kind of this idea that, the Lord really does want to lead our parishes. He wants to lead our ministries, and we just have to ask. And Jesus, I think, in his earthly ministry modeled this. He said things consistently like, I see what the Father's doing. That's what I do. I hear what the Father's saying. That's what I say. We had a synodal process way back in 2006 in the diocese here in Vancouver, and Archbishop Exner opened with one of these lines that stuck with me. And he said, Lord, we don't ask you to bless what we're doing, but to show us what you're blessing. The Lord really wants to be in charge. And that's part of the reason why we shouldn't be anxious, because he has a plan. It seems intuitive, especially as believers, that we should just be encountering the Lord and asking him. But tell us why that's so important to go to prayer, like real prayer, prophetic listening prayer. Lord, what do you want? And don't do anything he doesn't say to do. Why is that important? How do you do that as a team?
Well, it's important because if we don't ask him, then we're probably doing what we think looks best, and we're probably following brainstorming, and you get those metrics again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Cardinal Cantalamessa, the Pope's preacher, he gave an address to the bishops in the United States right after the former Cardinal McCarrick scandal. And in it, he gave this beautiful exhortation on prayer. And he used a line there that is at the center of how we operate in trying to teach this to other lay leaders and religious. And he says, the apostles and the saints, they didn't just pray before they did their work. They prayed in order to know what to do. That's the third principle. So the first principle for us for transformation is reacquiring a biblical worldview. The second one is moving from a staff to a team to a family. Those two things are for the purpose, really, of this third one, which is restoring the whole initiative back to God. And this is really what we're about in Acts 29, is trying to teach people how to do this. Because we've had priests over and over again just say to us, I've never learned this. Like, how do you learn how to discern not personal decisions for vocations, but collective decisions for the well-being of a parish or a ministry or a diocesan office or the presbyterate? In order to do that, you need, first of all, to know who's talking to me. That's why I need a biblical worldview. Like, does God talk? Does he care? So I need all the things that gives. And I have to have people around me who I trust and can be vulnerable with, and who love me and who I love, and who are brothers and sisters, and who pray and who hear the Lord, and they know how he speaks to them. Because the way you discern his will is, we, 4, 5, 6 of us, we're going to go into the chapel, and rather than just pray, which is great, we're going to pray very specific questions. And we're going to ask the Lord to speak. We're going to do it in silence, ideally in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Then we're going to come out of prayer and we're going to argue.
Yeah.
But we're going to argue to clarity. We're going to go like, what did he say to you? What did he say? What did he say? And now we're hearing the Lord, not just in the silence of our prayer, but through one another. And then it's the leader's task to drive to clarity. And the way he's taught us to do this is so simple, and it's so powerful, and it's so transformative. It's what we're going to teach the leaders in the diocese here and the priests when we're with them. It's at the heart of everything we do. There's 4 questions. So each of these, ideally, you take an hour with, if you could, half hour to an hour. And you go in and you tee up the first question. The first question is, Lord, it's the mindset of a steward. You're saying, Lord, what are the gifts that you've uniquely given to us? And maybe what's especially the one biggest gift that you've given to this archdiocese, this parish, this leadership team, this, whatever the case, this marriage. Yeah. Because it fits there too. And then you listen and you come out and you go, what did you hear? And you can make an inventory of that, but then it's the leader's task to go, okay, that's the biggest gift. Okay, we got clarity on that. Great. Then you go back in with the second question. Now the second question is, you put on like the mindset of a physician or of a patient. with Jesus as the divine physician. And you're basically asking, okay, Lord, we have a lot of wounds in this body, this marriage, this family, this parish, this presbyterate, this diocese. What's the biggest single wound? Like, where are we hemorrhaging? Like, show us a spiritual MRI. And you listen and you journal. And we got scriptures that we use for this. And then you come out and you get clarity. You go, okay, that's it. There's all these wounds, but that's the biggest wound. And we're in agreement on that. Mm-hmm. Then you go back in with a third question. And the third question flows from the military, because the basic military principle is the enemy gets a vote and we have an enemy. And he's delighted at the statistics you read, and he wants everything we do to fail. And he's got a strategy. Yeah. And so now you ask the Lord, okay, give us something like the mindset of a spy. So help us to peek into hell and show us what's on the screen, and, like hell's mission control for the Archdiocese of Vancouver, or for the Presbyterate of Vancouver, or for this team, this parish, our marriage. There's an awesome passage in the Old Testament where Syria and Israel are at war. And every time Syria tries to attack, Israel escapes. And finally, the king of Syria calls his generals in. He's like, where's the traitor? And one of the guys says, there's no traitor. There's a prophet in Israel who hears your thoughts in his bedchamber, and he warns them. So that's an Old Testament passage. So nothing in the Old Testament is greater than anything in the New. So because Jesus has defeated the enemy, like, we have access to hell's plans, and God wants us to see them so we can plan accordingly. And then you come out of that, you argue, and you go, okay, that's the biggest strategy: division, mistrust, suspicion, whatever. Yeah. And then you go back with the last question, and now you put on something like the mindset of a general. And you say, okay, Lord, based on what you've revealed is the biggest gift and the biggest wound and the enemy's strategy for us, where are you asking us to attack? Wow. So we got to do a lot of things, obviously, whether you're running a family or a parish or a diocese. But if we're going to spend an inordinate amount of time and money and effort doing one thing especially, what should it be? Based on all those things that you already revealed. And that's how we pastorally plan. And we teach this to people and they go, oh, this is amazing. Yeah. And that's why we don't charge for our work, because that would be stealing from God. Like God gave us this to give away, because it was an experiment when we first started. It's not an experiment anymore. This works. We've done it with too many leaders around the world. It's unbelievable how this works. Wow. I don't want to say cute as a way of diminishing it, but this idea of the trailer and the blueprints. And now the chapel has this secondary name, St. Joan of Arc Chapel, but the trailer is what you call it. Maybe just share that story. Yeah, we were building a expansion in the parish where I was at the time. And one day, as always happens on construction projects, this little portable trailer showed up in the parking lot, and I noticed it because it was really ugly. And then I just started to pay attention every day. And these guys would walk in and out of the trailer throughout the day for months and months until the project was done. And, after several days of watching this, I felt like the Lord just said, hey, dummy, what do you think's in the trailer? I'm like, blueprints? And he's like, yeah. And I felt like he just said, you need to come to me the way they go to that trailer. I have a plan. Not that it falls from the sky, not that we're passive. We're not passive. Mary isn't passive. Mary is actively receptive. And I think that's what we're trying to be. So we want to be actively receptive. We want God to take the initiative. We still have to cooperate with the initiative. Our image, Contra Mesa says again in that address, he says, the church is not a rowboat. The church is a sailboat. We're not being propelled by the strength of the arms of the guys in the boat. We're a sailboat. But if you watch a sailboat, the people on the boat, they're working. Right. I mean, they're in harmony with the wind and the waves, right? They're not just sitting back, letting the wind blow it wherever it goes. Well, that's the image of the church. We're in a sailboat. The Spirit's driving us, and we have to catch the wind and work with it. Yeah. That's where the trailer imagery comes from. And it's so flippin' exciting. Yeah. It's so exciting. Yeah. When you catch a word and you experience Sobornos, that term where you all experience Christ in a similar way, and it just becomes so clear. And you get there through a process where everybody's
story and their history, even sometimes their wounds, the Lord will use it to bring a level of wisdom into a plan that is just beautiful. And that's the way the church is supposed to be. This dependence on each other, right? Father John, we could go on, but I think I have to pause there because you've got other things to do. Thank you.
Welcome. Great being with you. Great being in Vancouver.
Yeah. Thank you for your yes. Thank you for going to the Archbishop with that idea, which I'm sure took courage. Thank you for all the ways that you're making what God is teaching you available to all of us. It is, it's incredible. And it's so neat to see it firsthand.
Thanks, brother. Great being with you.
Thank you, listeners. We'll see you next episode. God bless you all.